People who've met the parents and family of the person you intended to marry and then decided against marrying them after meeting them, what happened? Story 1. I knew a really sweet guy who went to the same college as I did who was super religious. But I didn't mind because it wasn't like shoving pamphlets in your face religious. Because he had a pretty strict religious background, much stricter than normal as you'll see, he couldn't date a girl until he courted her for 2 years. Essentially, he had to know you for over 2 years, regular contact in person, and only interacting in groups, before he could officially ask you out on a date. Now, this was a really good guy. He got his arm stuck in a vending machine for me. He was good. But obviously I wouldn't be telling the story here if his family were great people. About a year into knowing him, we were in the break room chatting about issues with a website, and the entire time we're talking, he's glancing at the clock nervously like it's going to explode. I check, and it's 4 p.m. I'm still watching it as it turns to 4:01, and suddenly I hear a car horn go off. I think that it's just traffic, until it's still going off at 4:04. I ask him what he thinks it's about, and he's white as a sheet, and sheepishly explains that it's his dad, and he needs to go home now. It was quite the eye-opener. If this dude, his dad, was willing to lay on the horn for over 5 minutes during finals, I can't imagine the other crap he'd do if I was ever late for anything. It sucked because the son was just trying to spend a few extra minutes with me, which was sweet. But I told him that I had been doing some thinking, and while we were good friends, we weren't really compatible relationship-wise, and he handled it like a champ. Last month, I discovered that I had dodged a bullet. You see, he had a brother, and his brother got hit by a truck. He lived, but in critical care, and no one in his family visited him because he stopped attending their church. The fact he moved 7 hours away eludes them. They also refused to attend his wedding. I'm very glad they're not my in-laws, and I didn't pursue a relationship with someone who refused to visit their critically injured brother because of religious views. They are horrible people. I hate when people use "I go to church" as a reason they're good people. It's not a blanket reason for goodness. Story 2. Dated this girl for 2 years. She was cute, but a little off, as in she would cut herself superficially, then talk about how much better she felt. Whatever, I was 19, and if you look past that, she was great. She was very close to her grandfather. I had met him a few times before. Sweet guy. One day, she gets the news that he's passing away, so we drive to see him off. Meeting the rest of the family, this is where it gets fun. Her mom didn't strike me as particularly crazy at first, but once I sat down to talk to her, she started getting overly sappy, talking about marriage. But no kids. Kids are the worst thing that can happen to you. Okay. The aunt just wanted to argue with everyone about everything and belittle her grown adult nieces and nephews. Her sister was very obviously a woman of the night, and almost always had some coke residue around the bottom ring of one nostril or the other. She also brought a bouquet that completely filled the tiny hospital room. The lady passing away next to Grandpa was not amused. Her brother offered me a slew of drugs while I was there. Much appreciated, but calm down, man. And as Grandpa laid there, struggling to hold on to the last threads of life, he got to watch his entire family fall apart, mostly arguing over which of his possessions would go to who. There were also some other rumors about Grandpa sensually molesting family members. This made his bedside as well. It was probably the most effed up last days a person has ever experienced. I left early because I couldn't stand it anymore. Too much drama over an ending life man. I had been contemplating how to break up with her the following few weeks after that, when she started hanging out with her manager at work, and after work, getting rides home with him, and boning him. Good riddance. To be fair, this would explain everyone being kind of crazy and effed up. It's sad when that happens, really. Story 3. It was one of the contributing factors, but yeah, the biggest reason I'm glad I'm no longer with this girl was her harpy of a mother. I've written about this girlfriend and her mom before, but I'll condense it a bit. Her mom couldn't handle the fact that her beautiful, feminine daughter was a lesbian. She hated me for not being male, Jewish, rich, or an Ivy League grad. The fact her daughter was happier with me than she'd ever been in her life didn't matter. She emotionally abused her and would use my girlfriend's OCD to manipulate her into not seeing me. You're driving that late with Leo? Aren't you worried you might get carjacked? She would grill her about our intimate life, and judging from things she'd said, I'm convinced this woman hasn't been intimate since my girlfriend was conceived. She forced me to submit to an STD test. Remember, girlfriend has OCD, so she'd convinced her I must be diseased. So to stop my girlfriend from panicking, I had to do it. She also treated my girlfriend like a child, literally telling her, "You're not an adult," and forcing her to live in a bedroom that was decorated for an infant. She threatened to call the cops and say I'd kidnapped her if she spent the night with me. Adding to the creepiness is that she would talk to me as if I was her daughter's babysitter or caretaker. This would include telling me that she needed to be home earlier so that she could get enough sleep. Ultimately, I would say that she was the end of our relationship because she more or less pushed and encouraged my girlfriend into another mental breakdown so she would leave college. She ended up institutionalized for about 6 months in 2 different fancy hospitals and hundreds of thousands of miles away from me. But she would sadly never be able to fully function again as an adult with her mom around. So I'm glad I don't have to deal with that crap anymore. That is crossing so many lines. Story 4. His mom was incredibly overbearing and controlled what he could and couldn't do by constant guilt-tripping and made-up stories. She would drape herself on him for snuggles to the point where it was awkward. I have children of my own, and I don't clasp them to my chest and sigh about how wonderful they are when their friends are over, and she would make sly digs at me all the time. What I was wearing, how I looked, why we were going out, how much money was being spent on me. We always split everything 50-50 at my insistence, by the way, and just generally made me feel like crap. He just took it. When I brought it up, he was super passive and was just like, "She's my mom, she's just overprotective." He had a sister, actually, who had left home but was clearly the favorite. Whenever she came home, he was forgotten and shrugged off, to the point where it was actually mean. Again, I brought it up to him, and he was all, "She's just excited to see her daughter." His dad was a very passive, albeit kind, man himself, who just seemed to roll with whatever his wife wanted, and I guess my boyfriend learned that from him. She was heading for classic mother-in-law from heck territory. There was no talking my boyfriend round. He batted my concerns and feelings on the matter away like they were nothing. I realized that would be our marriage, and I knew I couldn't live that way. It obviously wasn't the only reason I split from him, but it was a key issue. I have no regrets. When we split, he very quickly started dating and then married a local girl. They were divorced within 2 years, and from what I could gather from mutual friends, his mother was pivotal in the failure. Story 5. He wasn't my fiance, but he was my first boyfriend in high school and my last. Meeting his family freaked me out so much that I swore off relationships until I graduated with a college degree. Context, I'm an American citizen but was living in Asia for a time. I started high school in one of those countries. By junior year, I had my first boyfriend. One day, he invited me and our friends to his house for his birthday. I met his parents and sister at the house, and while they were nice, they treated me with some weird reverence. Everyone in town knew I was an Americana and knew I spoke mainly English. At one point, they gave me a tour of their house, and his folks were pressuring me to go into my boyfriend's bedroom alone with him. I said no. They then began to talk amongst themselves, but they failed to realize that I understood their language by then. Turns out that they were conspiring to get me locked in the room with their son, have their boy force me into doing stuff I didn't want to do, and then have the two of us marry. All this in the hopes of getting a green card for their kid and a ticket to migrate to America. Apparently, my American citizenship was all they saw of me. I was only 15 at the time. I went from being that teenager anticipating her first kiss to breaking up with him the next Monday at school. I didn't even know if that's how one gets a green card, but just knowing his parents were willing to ruin my life like that, nope, not having it. Blah. And they didn't think much of your parents either. If they assumed your parents would force you to marry someone who graped you. Story 6. Well, by intended to marry, I mean the first serious girlfriend I had as a 16 or 17-year-old, so it was kind of dumb to think that, but anyway, she was 18 or 19 while we dated, so I had started to think about marriage when we were both of age. She was a little rough around the edges, but man, when I met her family, they were the definition of white trash. Smoke filled the house with beer bottles everywhere, parents that were both in their early 40s but looked in their mid-60s, older sister that had a baby that she didn't know who the father was. Younger brother, nice enough to me, had pending assault charges and once bought a jar of pee off me to pass a drug test. Other brother was in jail for ending the life of someone while driving drunk. Every other word out of any of their mouths was a curse word. 6 kids, including my girlfriend, and not one of them had a high school diploma, and the 2 that were still school age had dropped out. I realized that, despite being poor, this was not a family I wanted to be a part of. I kept dating her a few more months after meeting them, but when I broke it off, family was the reason, which I actually did tell her. And I'm guessing the last thing that really frustrated me was that she paid rent, was 18, had a full-time job, and they still treated her like a child with rules, such as curfew, limited phone time, etc. While I would say her family was a huge part of us breaking up, it was not the only thing. But I couldn't actually say for 100% that we wouldn't have stayed if her family wasn't an issue. Story 7. I married him anyway, but from the day I met his mom, she hated me. She would rave about how much she adored his brother's girlfriends, but hated me. I tried so hard, but she hated me. My husband is her favorite thing, and she has an unhealthy attachment to him, so I think it's not personal and more along the lines of no girl will ever be good enough for him in her eyes. She's a witch, though. She once faked a severe panic attack to keep her son's attention on her, not me. The doctors at the hospital could see right through it, though, and knew she was faking. She called my husband the night before our wedding and told him if he married me, he would be miserable for the rest of his life. When we went home for Christmas, she tried to hook him up with her coworker, her married son, while I was right there. We rescued a shelter dog, and shortly after, he broke a leg due to malnutrition in his neglectful home. She told everyone that I didn't want to pay the vet bill and asked the vet to euthanize him. She laughed at me when she learned I was depressed. She told me I was being dramatic when I started crying after receiving news of my grandpa's death. She tells everyone that I came from a poor family and married my husband so I wouldn't have to work. I don't work right now because we just moved for his job. In reality, my parents are wealthier than her. She tries to belittle me, but it honestly doesn't bother me at all anymore. I laugh when she does, and it really ticks her off. Story 8. We weren't at the marry stage of things yet. Gay marriage wasn't legal back when this happened. But we had been dating for over a year and were considering moving in together. Apparently, my girlfriend had always used a gender-neutral nickname for my name anytime she talked about me to her family, and she never corrected them when they said he. But after a year of us dating, we were finally going to have a family dinner with them. She had already had dinner with my parents, and they loved her. And when I showed up, her parents had a really sour look on their face. Apparently, she hadn't told them that I was a girl until about 2 hours before the dinner was supposed to happen. Her parents weren't actually homophobic, just severely disappointed that they wouldn't be getting grandkids. Girlfriend was an only child, and that soured the mood of the dinner. Honestly, I'm sure they would have come around eventually, but that whole incident told me that my girlfriend wasn't ready to be out of the closet yet. One of the discussions during dinner was, don't tell grandma. And I wasn't going to move in with someone just to be the roommate to most of the people they know. I told her that I'd rather live by myself for now, and she got upset and we had a fight and ended up breaking up. I feel like a good part of the blame lies with your girlfriend for deceiving them. Even as someone who'd be okay with your relationship, I'd be ticked off if I discovered that my daughter was lying, lie of omission, to us for a year about her significant other. Story 9. His family was horrible to me, and he treated me so poorly while we were visiting, 3 weeks solid because they lived in another country. His mother constantly called me by his ex's name. I have the same name as his sister. How is it possible to get that confused with another name which both starts with a completely different letter and is much longer than mine? His sister wouldn't actually speak to me or include me in any kind of conversation. Her partner was totally lovely and tried his best to include me, but the times that I spent with his sister or mother, I was basically just the tag-along who was asked to hold the baby while they did things. His dad wasn't so bad, all things considered, but he made snide comments about my weight, which, yeah, is fair. Family, who he'd never met, lack of career aspirations, while I was financially supporting his butthole of a son who was trying to make a go of a business at the time, and was just generally a terrible human being. He wouldn't stick up for me or correct any of this, and whenever I brought it up, would basically say I was imagining it. By the end of this trip, we were sleeping in separate bedrooms, and I broke up with him not long after. For the record, snide comments about your weight were completely inappropriate and rude. That's never okay in any situation. Story 10. I married him anyway, but as long as we're talking about dodging bullets, I've got a good story about my mother-in-law. When my husband and I were dating, his mother spent the better part of a year and a half trying to convince him to dump me. I had done nothing to her whatsoever. When I would go visit, she would be nice to me in front of everyone, but then switch off and completely ignore me when no one else was around. Fast forward to 5 years later, we are married, but mother-in-law is now divorced. She had an affair with, and then secretly got married to, a man convicted of molesting his own children. She spent the better part of a year lying to us about why she wanted the divorce, that she was seeing someone, and then she tried to hide the man's past from us, along with her secret marriage. She sees nothing wrong with her actions and thinks her new husband is totally safe. We've cut her out of our lives for the safety of our children and for our own sanity. My mother-in-law's mother-in-law told her then future daughter-in-law not to marry her son. She did it anyway. After over 30 years of emotional abuse, constantly belittling her millions-income career and housework, her cooking, and every little thing she did, she finally divorced him, only after the abuse became physical. Story 11. I cut ties with my ex when I found out she cheated on me. I later found out through the one friend of hers that still spoke to me, though she ostracized me too for fear of losing her friendship with my ex, that she'd been effing the same guy who was like her brother for longer than we'd been dating. It's strange because depending on how you look at it, I was the guy she was cheating on him with. In hindsight, there were signs. She didn't respond to doing it the way that I would have expected her to, and any time he was brought up, the subject was changed pretty quickly. All of that is another story. Her parents were pretty great. Her mom was an adorable middle-aged woman, holding on to her youth, and had the cooking skill and desire to make sure everyone knows it one expects of a Croatian immigrant. For the unfamiliar, it's like Greek and Italian food had a love-hate child. Her dad was her adoptive dad. He was basically Mr. Bean. He made crappy dad puns and watched Croatia's Got Talent on his laptop. They understandably sided with their daughter. It was a real shame because they were and are an amazing family. I always felt welcome with them, and I was looking forward to having them as in-laws. After that first sentence, I thought you were going to say that she cheated on you with her dad. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 12. Was in a very serious relationship with a guy whose parents I didn't really like, but had no serious flaws. First sign was that they were slightly homophobic. I have a lot of LGBTQ friends, so this was concerning for me. I thought it was something I could deal with, but then when we were like 3 years in, his father got charged for molesting some kids, and everyone freaking stood up for him. I work with a lot of children who've been sexually abused, and parents who've gone through the process of charging them. It's not fun, and it usually takes a lot of convincing to get parents to do it. I really think he did it. It's creepy. There's a long list of questionable characteristics of this that lead me to think that he would, and the situation itself seemed fishy. My ex stood up for his father and flipped when I suggested that he may have done it, even though I'm convinced. It all settled, and they assumed he was obviously innocent. I have experience with this. They all walk. When they don't walk, it's like finding a 4-leaf clover. I couldn't be part of or even associated with that family. We were done. My ex was also a little witch, but that's another story. I want to hear the other story. Story 13. It's not exactly the reason, but it sets us down that path. My longtime girlfriend was a little borderline crazy, little hints of it here and there, but she managed to hide it. I finally went home with her after we got engaged, and her mom would sit in the back at the kitchen table with a little black and white TV playing solitaire, had no friends, complained constantly, isolated herself, and had little flashes of paranoia where the slightest thing was perceived as a major insult that would send her down day-long sulk sessions. She also looked kind of like my girlfriend, but did not age well, and was pretty heavy. I saw the future. It clicked with me that this was what I was getting into, that my girlfriend harbored all these same traits, both physical and mental, and was working super hard to hide it all. I decided that weekend I needed to break it off. Plot twist, as I worked up the courage over the next weeks, she canceled the wedding because she is a lesbian. Plot twist, I'm gay, she's not. Sorry, but that last line made me laugh. Thank you. I'm glad you saw the issue before you married her, but dang, that's funny. Story 14. A guy friend actually convinced me to break up with my boyfriend because of the family trends. My ex's father was always away on business, and his mom was a super cute, bubbly teacher. She would go out with her female teacher friends at night, and the dad would get super jealous and have massive phone fights. My ex and his sibling became super possessive of their mom and hated their dad to an unhealthy level. They thought both their parents were probably having an affair. My ex was 18 and had never done a single chore in his entire life. Their pets crap all over the house, and the mom cleaned everything, even my ex's bedroom. Our mutual guy friend took me to lunch one day and was like, "Seriously, is this the future you want? He's a cool guy, but the dude is seriously a terrible boyfriend and will be the worst husband." Turns out he had been cheating on me the whole time anyway with two girls that were best friends. They would just switch off the days that they did it with him. Story 15. It wasn't marriage, but my ex-girlfriend had a father that was the worst. I'm 24, so this was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Every time I would go to their house, he would constantly make homophobic or racist remarks. He would constantly be drunk. His drug dealer that sold him pills would stop by their house regularly, and everyone pretended that it wasn't happening. When I was in high school dating her, she ended up falling asleep at my house, and he showed up at 3 or 4 in the morning, drunk, saying she needed to get up. My parents understood, I guess, because they didn't know he was drunk and just thought he was being a protective father. He then went on to red rum my ex's mother and tried to end his own life. He was just a general piece of crap, and his daughter was literally one of the nicest people I've ever met. Like, the holy crap, you're too nice, I can't handle this type of nice. I think you may have buried the lead here. Story 16. I was engaged to a girl, and I already knew her family. Didn't know them too well, but saw them frequently. Things turned sour when her mother had to stay with us for a few days. With no exaggeration, her mother wailed like a freaking burn victim in her sleep. The rooms were divided by a plywood closet, so I got it full volume. No explanation. Step 2 of the ladder to relationship disaster happened when the two of them had almost identical mental breakdowns within a week. This family had some major mental health problems, but I overlooked most of it because I was in love with this girl. It made me realize that I could never deal with her mother in a relationship, and the very real possibility of her growing up just like her mom killed it for me. It was hard, but I had to let her go because I just knew I didn't have what it took to handle that level of crazy when the honeymoon was over. Story 17. Intended to marry my ex, but after meeting his mom a few times, I really couldn't do it. She was extremely possessive of her son and never smiled when I was with them. I was to blame for her son not eating properly. I always cooked healthy food for him. Sleeping properly, he worked 16 hours a day. Dressing properly, I ironed his shirts for him when he was too busy to do it. Any blame you can think of. She was also a single mom who had 2 sons with 2 different ex-husbands and had lots of drama with both. She wanted to retire at 45, but didn't have a stable income, so my ex had to give her money every month so she could retire and not work. All in all, I couldn't see myself dealing with the mom, so I eventually broke it off before it was too late. Hugh dodged a serious bullet there. Hopefully he can too eventually, before she consumes his life full force. Story 18. Okay, this one wasn't me, but a friend of mine was almost going to marry her ex last year, until she met his parents. She came from an irreligious household, however the guy she was seeing came from a really Christian home. They had been dating for maybe like 6 months or so on the premise of no whoopee because he wanted to wait. She had whoopee with other dudes before, but she really liked the guy, so she wanted to try and wait for him. Over the school break, she was going home with him to meet his family, and they're like way more religious and stricter than what she expected. They spend the whole week being passive-aggressive about how she's done it before with other guys, and is impure. They even tried to set him up on a date with another girl from his church while she was in the room. She dumped him a few days after they got back. Story 19. I loved her with all my being. Her father was a successful businessman and self-confessed narcissist. I tried to include him in venue selection, and he threw adult tantrums at each venue and told me he would not allow us to get married unless we did so on his terms. My fiance wanted a surprise wedding at our engagement party, which happened to be at their house. I tried to support this idea, though I knew the red flags were there. The day before, we told him our intentions. He yelled at us for an hour and told me how disappointed he was in us both and how he wouldn't let us do it because there were people he wanted to invite that weren't there. The whole event triggered my anxiety, and 6 months later, after couples counseling, our relationship fell apart. Story 20. Not so much after I met her family, but after she met mine. She wouldn't stop being extremely possessive of me around them, lots of kissing, inappropriate touching, then get mad when I politely asked her to stop. Then she lied several times. We're talking about being pregnant, not being pregnant, actually being pregnant, having an abortion, having cancer, among others. But really, her meeting my family was the beginning of the end. Lying about having cancer? Wow. Despite all the attention to chemotherapy, radiation is no fun at all. I would have happily let someone else take it from me if they wanted. Literally throwing up all the time while food tastes like metal crap. Then radiation takes all taste away, so everything becomes disgusting. So you live off food replacements. Just a little bit of the fun. Story 21. They started complaining about the N-words that hang around the park next door playing loud music, and all seemed rather violent about it. I don't recall a single kind word among them. Everything was a witchy or violent complaint against something or other. I got out for good when the boyfriend started showing signs of domestic abuse. Well, that's what I get for staying up way too late and posting drunk. Boyfriend showed signs of being abusive. Yeah, that would do it for me too. It's bad enough listening to that crap at red lights. Story 22. Meeting his family was one of the last straws, and certainly brought up huge red flags. His father was incredibly abusive to him growing up. My boyfriend was an only child that his father never wanted. His dad was obsessive and needy towards his mother, and basically wanted all her attention at all times, and was jealous of the child they had together. I could see some of these obsessive and needy tendencies in my boyfriend, and I knew he didn't want kids, and I did. If we had kids, I was afraid he would react how his father had. Maybe not in an abusive way, but I was still worried. We ended up breaking up for other reasons, but this definitely influenced it. Story 23. Didn't notice until I broke up with him, but several family members shot up red flags. An overly attached sister, she always wanted to be around, even on some of our dates. An I can do it better than you cousin, who always wanted to have the upper hand, but always had my boyfriend make loans for him. But what really did it was one time we were at one of his niece's birthday parties. All of them basically circled around us and asked us when we'd marry. After this, he'd always bring the marriage issue back up, and that's when it clicked. I did not want to marry the guy. He was being controlled by his family. Story 24. My ex-fiance's brother lived across the country, and I met him at Christmas for the first time. Guy shows up late and immediately picks a fight with his brother, who then proceeds to egg him on, calling him a loser and a scumbag. Brother goes to the guest room and does some serious bong rips and drinks a bottle of vodka. Comes out much happier and tells me that if I'm going to keep effing his sister, he better see a ring on her hand in the next 2 months. He was intending to move back. We broke up a few months later for several reasons, but this did not help at all. Story 25. When I met his mom, she was great. I had no issues with her. But while we were there, he was so rude to her. He kept cutting her off, talking over her, and raising his voice at her. If he could treat his nice mother so rudely, I knew he'd eventually treat me the same way. On top of that, his dad was into serial monogamy. He was married 3 times and had 3 kids with each wife and was currently looking for a 4th. When we were dating, his father's oldest child was 36 and his youngest was 4. I was worried my ex-fiancé would turn into his father. Story 26. One of my earliest relationships, great guy, we had a lot in common, enjoyed each other's company, etc. But one day his dad passed a remark about my dad that really upset me, and I couldn't respect him after that. Context, my dad, after retiring the head of a company, returned to finish the law degree he'd started 30 years earlier. He was clearly doing it to pass his time, but the ex's dad says to his son/my boyfriend, "If you don't study now," we were in college, "you'll end up like him and have to study in your 60s. Story 27. My ex's mom was a round, red-headed, red-faced she-beast who never spoke below a yell. She also had a very unhealthy and incestuous attachment to the son that I was dating. I was young and dumb and stayed longer than I should have. She was a huge witch to me and encouraged him to abuse me. But I began to question the relationship when she made him take her bra off for her. In front of me, it was a weird display of dominance. Massive bullet dodge there. That's not a bullet, that's a frickin' ICBM. Story 28. Years back, Weatherspoon's dinner to celebrate an ex-significant other's mother's birthday. Her never-to-be mother and sister-in-law ceaselessly bombarded me with questions about a wedding I hadn't even committed to. I realized that my future was being written by someone else, and that the marriage was the pinnacle of their existence. That wasn't the reason it ended, but it certainly contributed. It's funny how some women can live vicariously through other weddings. They can be so obsessive in helping that they might think they're planning their own. Story 29. Well, I didn't necessarily think I was going to marry him, but anyways, they were a super rich family. Parents still married, very snobby. I was a girl whose parents had been divorced for years. My mom remarried. My dad has recently passed. I was terrified of his family. They just blatantly looked down upon someone of my kind. His mom told him I was the most disrespectful girl she had ever met, because I called my stepdad by his first name. Story 30. Could not stand how the siblings and him treated their mom and got on their nerves. Sometimes she was being annoying, but mostly just in the way that moms can be concerned about things or just trying to converse. Their tone and face made it obvious whenever they were annoyed, and I did not want that passed on to any future kids. I felt sorry for her. My parents were divorced, but my father still would not have allowed us to be hurtful and rude to our mom. Story 31. I was staying at my girlfriend's parents' house. First morning, father was out feeding animals. Girlfriend and her mother were getting breakfast ready. I saw girlfriend put what I thought was an artificial sweetener into her father's coffee. I asked if I could try one. She explained to me it was not a sweetener, but a chill pill. They kept her father dosed. I decided right then I was not going to be a part of this family. Story 32. This wasn't me, but a friend of mine. She was planning on marrying a guy, but after meeting his family, she decided against it. The parents she loved, but his brothers and cousins she couldn't stand. A lot of them were extremely homophobic, and his brother had a really bad coke and heroin problem that apparently wasn't a big deal to her boyfriend, fiance at the time. Story 33. Married, no regrets, but I will say that my in-laws haven't talked to me for over 6 years, but regularly send home health and diet magazines to me through my husband. I've gained 45 pounds, 12-year marriage. Their passive aggressiveness, I saw it before we married. I made my bed. You marry their family for sure. Story 34. Okay, so I wasn't even going to marry the girl. We had just started dating, but her family liked to get together every couple of months and smoke crack. They even invited me to their next crack night when I first met them. That, along with multiple other things, made me get the frick out of there fast. Story 35. My ex and I talked about marriage a lot, and I ended it with him, but his mother was more obsessed with him than I think anyone could be. The vibe was creepy, and she always reminded him of his ex-fiance. I'm not kidding. I thought she might have wanted him. Story 36. Anti-Semitic parents who, after finding out I was a quarter Jewish, called false tips on my family's business, saying we were in the cocaine business. Calling in false tips is illegal, as they found out the hard way. Story time, please. Story 37. The person I intended to marry passed away of cancer while we were still finishing college. Her family adopted me as their own in the most loving way. It was really quite remarkable. Story 38. I ran into my parents in the grocery store. It felt awkward, but I didn't know what else to do, so I said hi. They walked right past me without a hint of acknowledgement. Story 39. This thread has made me realize how much I love my parents and how normal they are. Story 40. I just saw Get Out. Frick, that was a good movie. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.